A lot of folks on Wall Street, Main Street, concerned about the prospects for a recession. How would President Bernie Sanders prevent another economic recession?
Well, look, I think what everybody understands now is we're coming near the end of the Obama recovery. And we're now about to enter the Trump recession. And what we have got to do is make sure that we protect the most vulnerable people in this country. We've got to raise wages. We've got to make sure that we protect people's houses so that people don't lose what they did in the last recession.
In terms of the U.S.-China trade deal, or the lack thereof a deal, Senator Sanders, other folks in the Democratic field have argued that tariffs might be a needed tool to negotiate with other countries. How would President Sanders' trade policy differ from how President Trump is negotiating with the Chinese?
Well, we should be clear. Bernie Sanders voted against all of these job-killing trade deals, NAFTA, PNTR, and so on and so forth. But the difference is that Donald Trump has gone in and dealt with this with a hand grenade, right? As opposed to having real sit-down discussions, he goes in there and it's mostly bluster and puffery, causes the other side to engage in the same kind of conduct. We need to sit down and have real discussions about how we move forward with a trade relationship which benefits working people in both countries.
But tariffs are a tool that can be utilized in negotiations. Would Senator Sanders agree?
Well, they certainly are a tool. Obviously, they're in the Constitution, so they are a tool. But tariffs are a last resort. And the goal is to make sure that you have trade agreements on the front end, which cannot be abused as easily as the ones we currently have. So that's job number one. In terms of our relationship with China, we've got to get back to the table. We've got to start having real discussions as opposed to a lot of chest pumping.
I was struck by this, and in talking with staffers on the Sanders campaign, just as the debate continues to move forward within the Democratic primary, about USMCA, for example, there hasn't been too much chatter about that in particular. We did see it at the last debate. Senator Sanders says he's going to vote against USMCA.
Yes,
Why?
Yes. Well, look, one of the main problems with many of these agreements is that you give up U.S. sovereignty. You're not going to have an international panel which is going to tell the federal government of the United States, the state governments, and the local governments what regulations they can and cannot have governing, the economy, governing the environment, and so on and so forth. That is a fundamental giving up of American sovereignty to corporate interests, and that's just not going to happen.
So you would propose that a Sanders administration would really just go back to the drawing board with Mexico and Canada?
Absolutely. And I think, what we've seen in the news is there's an appetite on both of their parts to have a real trade agreement, which is very, very different than NAFTA, and I think that's what we have to do.
All right, so just within the news in the past couple of hours, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu banning two progressive congresswomen from going to Israel. What's the Sanders response been to that?
Well, look, Israel is one of our strong allies in the Middle East. We provide them a lot of assistance. But let's be clear, that government, and that's not Israel, it's the government of Israel, has been engaged in some really bad policies, which are holding that country back, that are pushing down the Palestinians. There's a lot of, when you criticize the government of Israel, you get some pushback. But, you can be firmly American and criticize the American government, just like you can with Israel. And I think that the Netanyahu government, which has obviously been alleged to have been engaged in a tremendous amount of corruption and far-right policies, it's a very unhealthy situation.
Is this Joe Biden's party? The Democratic Party?
No, I don't know that it's ever been Joe Biden's party, frankly. But let me put it this way. The rank and file of the Democratic Party has moved substantially in a more progressive direction. Like, they understand that the way you beat Trump, the way you transform the economy, is to move the country in a very different direction that makes sure that the economy and the government work for a much broader range of people in this country.
I'm not going to ask you to criticize Senator Elizabeth Warren. I know you're friends, the Sanders and Warren campaign. What's the biggest difference on policy between Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders?
Well, look, there are a number of policy differences, but I think to the point that you just made, and I think we saw this in the last debate, is that there's just a discussion going on in the party right now, a much bigger discussion than personalities, about what direction the party is going to go moving forward. And you have a more progressive wing, and you have the old corporatist wing, right, which is sort of withering at the grassroots. And I think what we'll see as you get closer to the actual dates of voting, that voters will then start to pick the individual person. But right now, there's a debate going on about the direction of the country, and the progressive wing of the party is clearly
winning. Last question for you.
Sure.
A lot's been made of Medicare for All and Senator Kamala Harris's proposed Medicare for plan. Is Kamala Harris's Medicare plan Medicare for all?
No. Absolutely not. Look, it relies on private insurance companies. There is no way you can provide health care for all Americans, comprehensive health care, without getting rid of the private insurers and substantially lowering the cost of prescription drugs in the country. The only way you can do that is with a single insurance pool of Americans, and her plan does not do that.